Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Across the Country with Amanda. Now, as country music fans, we all know the stories and words to the big chart-topping hits by heart. But what about those songs that didn't get much radio play? In this series, I'm talking about the most underrated songs in country music, and I am kicking it off with a song that should have been a huge hit from Sons of the Desert. In 1999, Sons of the Desert, they released a song called Albuquerque. Now, the Sons of the Desert, they came on the Nashville radio scene around 1997 with their first release. That one was called Whatever Comes First. And that was a top 10 single, but I feel like it's one of those forgotten 90s hits. Sons of the Desert, they started out as a group of 5 members, and you could hear them on records by Joe Diffie and Ty Herndon. They were all label mates back then. And go back and listen to Ty Herndon's #1 hit, It Must Be Love. That's the Sons of the Desert doing those background vocals. Now, also around this time, lead singer Drew Womack, he wrote Kenny Chesney's She's Got It All. That was Kenny's very first #1 hit, and it was a huge 3-week #1 on country radio, making it one of the biggest songs of the year. Fast forward to 1999, the band had an entire album recorded. They had already released the lead single from that album, which did chart in the lower 40s. And then in October of that year, they released Albuquerque. The guys were signed to Epic Records. Now, there was another song on this yet-to-be-released album. This was a song they sang a lot in concert, and they really wanted to release it as a single. And that song was called Goodbye Earl. But Sons of the Desert, they were not the only ones who loved that song. Their label mates, the Chicks, they also ended up recording and wanting to release that song as a single. Ultimately, it was the label who decided that the Chicks would get to release the song to radio, and that would go on and become a top 15 for them in 2000. Eventually, Sons of the Desert, they decided to leave Epic Records due to creative reasons. So what happened to the album that was completely finished? Well, it actually never saw the light of day. It was never released, and to this day, no one has heard it. The band, they were nominated for Male Star of Tomorrow at the TNN Music City News Awards. That is what is now known as the CMT Music Awards, but back then it took place during Fanfare in Nashville, and all the big stars would gather. This time it was at the arena downtown, and Sons of the Desert, they actually performed Albuquerque on the show. And like I mentioned, they were up for Male Star of Tomorrow, which also featured the Wilkinsons. Gary Allen and Keith Harling were also in that category. And the winner, that was Michael Peterson. And even though the guys didn't win, it was still pretty cool that they got a performance slot on that show. After the band leaves Epic Records, they were signed to MCA Records pretty much immediately. And this is one of the biggest record labels in Nashville. And in June of 2000, they released an album called Change, which did feature a new version of Albuquerque. And the guys have been quoted as saying that the new version of Albuquerque felt more like what you would expect to hear when you saw them live in concert. And at this point in their career, the Sons of the Desert, they're now a trio. And around this time is when Leanne Womack's I Hope You Dance, that was released, and that song was absolutely everywhere. And that was Sons of the Desert who provided the iconic background vocals on that song. When it came to awards in Nashville, that song absolutely swept pretty much everything it was nominated for. The CMA named it Song and Single of the Year. The Academy of Country Music named it Single, Song, and Vocal Event of the Year. And Sons of the Desert were nominated for Top New Vocal Duo or Group by the Academy of Country Music. During the late 90s in country music, we were seeing a lot of the pop country dominance at radio, but Albuquerque, it was a bit heavier. It was moody, just something completely different than what we're used to on country radio. It was very unique, but it didn't feel out of place when you compared it to other songs that were being played on radio during that time. And for me, I still think they are one of the most fantastic bands and some of the best songwriters to arrive in Nashville. Albuquerque was released in 1999. It would peak at number 58 on the country airplay charts. And like I mentioned earlier, you can find it on their album Change, which you can stream just about everywhere. The band would go on to release 8 singles in their career before they did eventually disband in 2002. And Drew Womack, he is now the lead vocalist for Lonestar. They've got lots of great new music out there, and they have reimagined versions of Lonestar's biggest hits, which feature Drew on the lead vocals. And if you haven't seen him in concert, that is a show you do not want to miss. So I'm going to continue this series with songs that I thought should have been bigger hits, so be sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And of course, let me know what other Sons of the Desert songs you remember loving. And you're going to hear me talk more about Sons of the Desert in a future episode because they had another song from the late 90s that was one of the best of the entire decade. And for me, it was pretty much criminal that it did not receive more recognition than it did. So be on the lookout for that one. As always, thank you so much for listening. You can find me every week on the syndicated radio program Across the Country with Amanda.